Neighbor cut down 3 mature oak trees on my property while I was at work because they blocked his view of the lake. So I sued him for triple damages, and now he is terrorizing my dog whenever I let him outside. My husband Danju runs a successful landscaping and boutique nursery business that brings in a good income, enough for us to buy our dream property about 2 years ago. We found this amazing 3-acre plot that backs right up to a small private lake. It was expensive, but Danju has been saving for years because he is obsessed with botany and creating his own private arboretum. The highlight of this property, and the main reason we bought it over the other options, was a cluster of 3 massive 100-year-old oak trees right near the property line. Danju estimated they were easily over 80 feet tall. They provided this incredible canopy of shade for our backyard and the patio area where we spend most of our evenings. We have a neighbor, let's call him Gary, who lives in the house directly up the hill from us. He's a retired guy, probably in his late 60s, who lives there with his 7-year-old grandson, Bobby. From what I gathered, Gary has custody of Bobby because the parents aren't in the picture. For the first year or so, things were relatively quiet. We were polite. We'd wave when we saw him getting his mail. Danju even offered to help him with some of his hedges once or twice because Danju is just generous with his time and equipment like that. However, Gary always seemed to have this chip on his shoulder about us. He would make little comments about how nice it must be to be young and have fancy trucks, referring to Danju's work vehicles. He also complained constantly about the view. Because our house is down the slope from his, our roofline and our trees are technically in his line of sight toward the lake. He mentioned a few times that those weeds, referring to the ancient oaks, were blocking his panoramic view of the water and lowering his property value. Danju always explained politely that the trees were older than both of our houses combined, that they were healthy, and that they were a protected species in our area, not that we would ever cut them down anyway. Danju treats trees like they are people. He has names for some of them. He spent thousands of dollars having an arborist come out last year just to do preventative care and feeding for the root systems. So this whole mess kicked off about 3 weeks ago. Danju and I went away for a 3-day weekend to attend a horticultural expo in the next state over. It was a mix of work and vacation for us. We were having a great time, and Danju was actually looking at buying some rare Japanese maples to plant in the side yard. When we turned into our driveway on Sunday afternoon, the first thing I noticed was how bright the backyard looked. Usually the house is in dappled shade that time of day. Then Danju slammed on the brakes. He didn't even put the truck in park, he just shut it off and jumped out. I looked where he was looking and my stomach just dropped. The 3 oak trees were gone. They weren't just trimmed, they were leveled. There were 3 massive stumps sticking out of the ground, surrounded by mountains of sawdust and debris. The trunks had been bucked into logs and were stacked messily on our lawn, crushing the grass Danju had spent all spring aerating. I got out of the truck and just stood there. I couldn't process it. It looked like a bomb had gone off in our garden. Danju was walking around the stumps, touching the raw wood, and he looked like he was about to cry. He kept saying, "They're gone, they're just gone." Then I looked up the hill and saw Gary standing on his deck, holding a beer. He was leaning over the railing, looking down at us. Danju saw him too. Danju isn't a confrontational guy. He's usually very chill and prefers to talk things out, but he marched right up the slope to the property line fence. I followed him because I was worried he might actually hop the fence. Danju yelled up to Gary, asking what the hell happened to our trees. He was shaking. He was so angry. Gary didn't even look guilty. He took a sip of his beer and shouted down that he did us a favor. He said he hired a crew on Friday morning right after we left. He claimed the trees were a hazard and that he was worried they would fall on his house during a storm, which is ridiculous because they lean away from his property. Danju yelled back that those trees were on our land, that they were healthy, and that Gary had no right to touch them. Danju was listing off the species and the age, explaining that you can't just chop down hardwoods that size without permits or permission. That's when Gary's whole demeanor changed, and he got this nasty look on his face. He said, "Look, buddy, I improved your property value. You were living in a cave down there. Now you have some sunlight. You should be thanking me instead of whining about some firewood." Danju told him that he had committed a crime and that we were going to call the police. Gary laughed and said, "Go ahead, it's a civil matter. I did what a real property owner does. I managed the vegetation. Maybe if you spent less time playing in the dirt with your little flowers and acted like a real man who cares about his assets, you would have done it yourself years ago." He actually said that. He called my husband, who runs a 6-figure landscaping business, not a real man because he didn't clear-cut the land. Then Gary said, "Besides, I wanted Bobby to be able to see the boats on the lake. You're going to tell a kid he can't see the water because you like shade." I immediately stepped in and told Gary that he was delusional if he thought using his grandson as a shield was going to work. I told him he had trespassed, destroyed property, and that this wasn't going to just go away. Gary sneered at me and said, "It's done. Wood is cut. Get over it. I'll even let you keep the lumber. That's worth money." He turned around and went back inside his house, slamming the sliding glass door. We called the police and they came out to write a report. They confirmed it was trespassing and destruction of property, but like Gary predicted, they said the damages would have to be handled in civil court. They took photos and interviewed us, but they couldn't arrest him right there since he claimed he thought the trees were a danger. Danu spent the rest of the night on the phone with his lawyer and the arborist he uses for his business. The arborist came out the next morning to do a damage assessment. When the appraisal came back, I almost passed out. Because of the size, age, and species of the oaks, and because they were amenity trees that added significant value to the property, the replacement cost was calculated at over $60,000 per tree. Since our state has laws regarding timber trespass that allow for triple damages, treble damages, if the cutting was willful and malicious, we were looking at suing Gary for over $500,000. We had our lawyer draft a demand letter immediately. We weren't asking for an apology anymore. We were asking for full compensation for the destruction of our property. I felt sick sending it because I know Gary is retired and living on a fixed income, but looking at my devastated backyard and seeing how heartbroken Danu was, I didn't care. Danu hasn't been the same since it happened. He doesn't want to go into the backyard. He just stares out the window at the stumps. He had planned to build a treehouse and the largest one for our future kids. Now that's gone. We sent the letter 2 days ago. Yesterday, Gary came down to the fence line while I was letting our dog, Max, out to pee. Max is a golden retriever mix, the friendliest dog in the world. Gary started yelling at me, asking if this letter was a joke. He said there was no way 3 weeds were worth that much money. He said we were trying to bankrupt him over nothing. I told him that he should have thought about his finances before he hired a crew to destroy our property. I said we weren't negotiating. He started getting really aggressive, screaming that he has a kid to raise and that we are heartless yuppies who care more about plants than people. He said, "You think you can bully me with your fancy lawyers, you watch yourself." Then he threw a half-full beer can at Max. It missed him, but it scared the poor dog half to death. Max ran back inside shaking. I yelled at Gary that if he ever threw anything at my dog again, I would call the cops for animal cruelty. He just flipped me off and walked away. So now we are living next to a guy who owes us a fortune, hates our guts, and is targeting our dog. Danu says we should just let the lawyers handle it, but I'm terrified to let Max out in his own yard. I feel like we are in a war zone. I look at those stumps and I just feel rage. Edit update 1, 3 days later. I've been reading the comments and I want to address a few things. A lot of people are asking if we had a survey or if the trees might have been on the property line. Yes, we had a survey done when we bought the house 2 years ago. The trees were fully on our side, about 5 feet from the fence line. There is absolutely no ambiguity about ownership. We have the marker stakes to prove it. Also, people are asking how a tree crew could come onto our property without us knowing. We live in a somewhat rural area where the houses are set back from the road, and our driveway gate was open because we were expecting a package delivery while we were gone. The crew must have just driven their trucks right onto our lawn. Danu found out from a neighbor down the road that the crew Gary hired wasn't a licensed bonded company. It was just some guys with chainsaws and a pickup truck that Gary found on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. That's why they didn't ask for permits or proof of ownership. A real arborist never would have touched those trees without talking to the owner. I want to talk about what's been happening the last few days because things are getting weird. After Gary threw the beer can at Max, I installed cameras all along the back of the house pointing at the fence line. Danu also put up no trespassing signs every 10 feet along the property border. Gary has been pacing back and forth along his deck staring at our house. He looks frantic. I think the reality of the lawsuit is setting in. Yesterday morning, Danu was loading his truck for work, and Gary came down to the fence again. He didn't yell this time. He tried to act buddy-buddy. He called out to Danu, "Hey Dan, got a minute?" Danu is a saint, honestly. He walked over there, but he kept his distance. I watched from the kitchen window. Gary started giving this sob story about how he didn't know the trees were worth that much and that he was just trying to help us out. He said, "Look, I can pay you for the firewood. I'll give you $500. That's fair, right? Let's just drop this lawyer nonsense. We're neighbors." Danu told him calmly that the damage was done and it was out of his hands. He said the trees were irreplaceable and that the $500 offer was insulting considering it would cost thousands just to grind the stumps and repair the lawn damage from the trucks. Gary got angry again when the nice guy act didn't work. He said, "You're ruining a family over some wood." I hope you're proud of yourself. Bobby needs braces. You want to take the money out of a kid's mouth. Danyu told him that Gary should have thought about Bobby's braces before he committed a felony on our property. Danyu said, "You came onto my land and destroyed something I loved. Don't try to guilt me with your grandson." Gary spat on the ground near Danyu's boots and walked away muttering. Later that afternoon, I let Max out. I stayed on the porch with him because I don't trust Gary. As soon as Max went into the grass, I heard a loud air horn blast. It came from Gary's deck. Max yelped and scrambled back to the porch, slipping on the wood because he was so panicked. I looked up and saw Gary hiding behind his patio furniture, holding an air horn. He popped his head up and laughed. I screamed at him that I was recording him. He yelled back, "I'm just scaring away varmints. It's legal to protect my property from pests." Max is a 70-pound golden retriever who wouldn't hurt a fly. He wasn't even near the fence. I called the non-emergency police line to report the harassment. They said they would send an officer out to talk to him, but unless he physically hurts the dog or comes onto the property, there isn't much they can do except document it. The officer came by around 5 p.m. He went up to Gary's house. I don't know what was said, but the officer came back down and told us that he warned Gary about the noise ordinance and harassment. The officer looked at the stumps in the yard and just shook his head. He said, "I've seen neighbor disputes, but I've never seen anything like this. You folks hold tight with that lawsuit. That's your only way out of this." Danyu is devastated about Max being scared. Max is Danyu's shadow. Now the dog won't go outside without a leash, even in our own fenced yard. He shakes if he hears a loud noise. Danyu told me last night, "I don't care about the money. I just want him to leave us alone. But I know if we drop the suit, he'll just do something worse." I think he's right. Gary is a bully, and the only thing bullies understand is consequences. Update 2 months later. We are deep in the legal process now. Our lawyer filed the suit, and Gary has been served. We are asking for the statutory maximum because of the malicious nature of the act. Gary tried to countersue us for obstruction of view and emotional distress, claiming our trees were causing him depression. His lawyer must be a strip mall ambulance chaser because our lawyer laughed for 5 minutes straight when he read the filing. There is no right to view in our state unless there is a specific easement, which there isn't, but the stress is real. Gary is losing it. We found out from another neighbor, a nice lady named Rose who lives 2 doors down, that Gary put his house on the market. Apparently, he doesn't have the cash to pay the damages if he loses, and his lawyer probably told him he's going to lose. Rose told me that Gary has been bad-mouthing us to everyone in the neighborhood. He's telling people that we are rich, heartless monsters who hate children, and that we are trying to steal his house because we are greedy. Most of the neighbors know the truth because they can see the giant stumps in our yard, but it's still uncomfortable to check the mail and feel like people are watching. 2 days ago, Gary showed up at our front door. He didn't look aggressive this time. He looked defeated. He had Bobby with him. He was holding Bobby's hand. The poor kid looked terrified. I opened the door but kept the screen door locked. Danyu stood right behind me. Gary said, "Please, I'm begging you, drop the suit. I can't sell the house." "Where will we go? Bobby has school here. You can't do this to a family." He pushed Bobby forward a little bit. "Tell them, Bobby. Tell them we don't want to move." It was the most manipulative, disgusting thing I have ever seen, using a 7-year-old boy as a human shield for his own stupidity. Danyu stepped in front of me. He looked at Gary and said, "Gary, you need to leave. Do not bring a child into this. You created this situation." Gary started crying, actually crying. He said, "I'm an old man. I made a mistake. I just wanted a view. I didn't think you'd care this much about trees." I said, "You didn't think we'd care. You waited until we left town to do it. You knew exactly what you were doing. You thought you could get away with it because you think you're better than us." I told him that we aren't dropping the suit. We have tens of thousands of dollars in damages to our property value, plus the cost of cleanup, plus the emotional toll. I said, "If you are worried about Bobby, you should have thought about that before you picked up a chainsaw. Go home, Gary." He stood there for a minute, staring at us. Then his face hardened again. The sadness vanished, and the nasty, bitter old man came back. He pulled Bobby back roughly and said, "You'll regret this. You think you won. You haven't seen anything yet." He dragged the kid off our porch. I called Child Protective Services after they left. I told them about him using the child as a prop in the unstable behavior. I don't know if they will do anything, but I felt like I had to report it. Bobby didn't look safe with him. Since then, the harassment has ramped up. Gary bought a high-powered spotlight and mounted it on his deck. He aims it directly at our bedroom window at night. We had to buy blackout curtains. He also started throwing garbage over the fence. We wake up to empty beer cans, fast food wrappers, and even dog poop bags in our yard. We are documenting everything. Every piece of trash, every light shine, every incident. Our lawyer is adding it all to the file. Danju is trying to stay strong, but I can tell he's exhausted. He just wants his sanctuary back, but the sanctuary is gone. Even if we win the money, the trees won't grow back in our lifetime. Final update, 1 month later. Things finally came to a head last weekend. It was a nightmare, but at least it's over now. It was Saturday night, around 11:30 p.m. Danju and I were watching a movie in the living room. We heard a loud crash from the backyard, followed by Max going absolutely ballistic barking. Then we heard glass breaking. Danju grabbed a baseball bat he keeps by the door and told me to call 911. He ran to the back door. I was on the phone with the dispatcher when I heard Danju yelling, get out of here." I looked out the back window. The floodlights were on. Gary was in our backyard. He had driven his riding lawnmower through our fence. He literally rammed it through the wooden privacy fence, creating a huge hole. He was drunk. He was stumbling around our patio, swinging a golf club. He had smashed our patio table. That was the glass we heard breaking. He was screaming that we ruined his life and that he was going to level the whole place. Max was barking and snapping at him, trying to protect the house. Gary swung the golf club at Max. Thank God he missed, but he hit one of Danju's potted Japanese maples instead, shattering the pot. Danju ran out onto the patio. He didn't attack Gary, he just stood between him and the house and the dog. He held the bat up and yelled, "Drop it, Gary. The police are coming." Gary looked wild. He had foam in the corners of his mouth. He yelled, "I'm not leaving. This is my view. You stole my view." He swung the club at Danju. Danju blocked it with the bat. The sound of the metal hitting the wood was sickening. Danju pushed Gary backward. Gary tripped over one of the smashed planters and fell into the pile of debris from the fence he destroyed. He tried to get up, but he was too drunk. He just laid there screaming obscenities at us. The police arrived about 3 minutes later. They came swarming into the backyard with flashlights. They found Gary lying in the dirt, surrounded by broken glass and fence pickets. They handcuffed him immediately. He fought them, spitting and kicking. They had to drag him to the cruiser. It turns out Gary's blood alcohol level was through the roof. They charged him with everything they could: aggravated trespassing, destruction of property for the fence and the patio furniture, assault with a deadly weapon for swinging the club at Danju, and animal cruelty for swinging at the dog. Because he broke the fence and drove a vehicle onto the property while intoxicated, they also got him for DUI on private property, which is apparently a thing here. Bobby wasn't home, thank God. We found out later he was staying with an aunt that weekend. Gary has been in jail since Saturday. The judge denied bail because he is considered a danger to the community and to us specifically. His lawyer quit. We heard from Rose, the neighbor, that the family is stepping in. The aunt who had Bobby is petitioning for full custody. They are expediting the sale of the house to pay for Gary's legal defense and the damages he owes us. Our lawyer says that with the criminal charges, the civil suit is basically a slam dunk now. We will get a lien on the house sale proceeds, so we will get paid before he sees a dime. It feels weirdly quiet here now. The spotlight is off. There's no trash coming over the fence. Danju and I went out to the backyard yesterday to clean up the mess. We fixed the fence temporarily with some plywood. We stood by the stumps of the oak trees. Danju put his hand on the cut wood of the biggest one. He said, "I think I'm going to hire a carver. We can turn the stumps into something, maybe a bear for Max or just some nice chairs." I started crying. I hadn't cried through the whole thing, but hearing him try to find something beautiful in the destruction just broke me. We are going to plant new trees, fast-growing ones this time. Maybe some tulip poplars or sycamores. We're going to use the settlement money to build the most amazing garden anyone has ever seen. It won't bring the oaks back, but it will be ours. And the best part is, the view from up the hill is going to be terrible for a while. We're thinking of putting up a very tall, very ugly shed right in the line of sight where the trees used to be. You know, to store the gardening equipment. After all, a real property owner has to protect their assets. We are getting a restraining order finalized this week, just in case he ever gets out. But honestly, I think Gary is going to be away for a long time, and when he gets out, he won't have a house to come back to. Max is doing okay. He's still jumpy, but he played fetch this morning for the first time in weeks. We're going to be okay. It was a hell of a price to pay for some peace and quiet, but at least we finally have it.